All right, hi everyone. Today we are going to take notes on the obligations and responsibilities of citizens. So, on last week, earlier in the week, we talked about what is a citizen in the United States, and remember there was three ways that you could be a U.S. citizen. Two of those are being a natural born citizen. So we had law of blood, meaning that your parents were citizens, therefore you're a citizen, and then we had the law of soil, which means you were born on American territory, born on American soil. So those are ways to be native born citizens, and then the third way um, is to become a naturalized citizen, which means you were born in another country as not a citizen. You immigrated to this country, you followed the legal process, and became a naturalized U.S. citizen. And remember, there were some requirements for that. You had to be 18, you had to apply for your green card, you had to wait 5 years, you had to have good moral character by passing an interview and fingerprinting, you had to know English and pass the citizenship test, and then you could become a naturalized citizen. So today, what we're going to talk about is not who is a citizen or what is a citizen. Today, we're going to talk about what are the requirements of being a citizen of the United States. And there's two things that you need to know. And one is the difference between obligations and responsibilities. That's a really important one you need to know. And then you need to know examples of both. What are examples of obligations? What are examples of responsibilities? And be able to identify those. So I'm going to look at the notes real quick. All right. So today you'll be taking notes on page 9 of your interactive notebook. You're going to be taking Cornell notes. So you'll need to set up Cornell notes, line at the top, line at the bottom, leaving 4 or 5 spaces, line connecting them, and you're going to put your vocab words on the left, and then the notes and definitions on the right. And hopefully we're getting a lot better at that by this point. Okay. Today's PowerPoint's a little bit shorter. I'll make sure and highlight what you need to take notes on, give you time to take notes, and you can ask questions if you have any questions. Okay. All right, let's get started. The obligations and responsibilities of citizens. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to write down is the definition of an obligation. An obligation, just to make it confusing for you, can also be called a duty, but your civics exam uses the term obligation, so that's what we're going to use. So you're going to write down this. Look how much better I'm getting at that. You're going to write that down on the left of your notes, an obligation, and then you're going to write the definition here in red on the right-hand side of your notes. So this is really important. An obligation is something that citizens are required to do by law. It is not optional. You have to do it or you are breaking and violating the law. So when we talk about an obligation, it can also be referred to as a duty, but an obligation or duty is something that you are required to do by law. So you need to write that down on the left, the definition on the right, in red there on the right. You don't have to write down the examples because the next couple slides are going to run through them. So, for example, what are obligations of United States citizens? You have to obey the laws. If you don't obey the laws, you can be fined or put in jail. You have to pay your taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, you can be fined or put in jail. These are things you have to do. If you get jury duty, you have to report. You have to sign up for something called the selective service, which is an important vocab word that we'll talk about. These are things you are legally required and must do. So it's important to understand the difference between a responsibility and an obligation. Okay, so an obligation is something you're required to do. Okay, all right, let's get rid of that. Again, and we will have a small quiz on Friday and a bigger test the following Friday. This will be a question, so make sure you know this one. Okay, all right. So now we're going to go through some examples of obligations. So on the left, you may want to, on the left of your Cornell notes, you may just want to write down. I'm not going to spell obligations. Bad spelling there. On the left, you may just want to write down examples of obligations or something like that. And then on the right, I think there's 4 or 5 of them. You might just want to list them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So on the left, again, I would put examples of obligations. And then on the right, you could just write, that's sloppy, but you could write down obeying the law. So the first obligation that citizens have is that they must obey the law. Everyone is under the law and required to obey the law. You have to know the law. You have to follow the law. And this is an important vocab word we'll talk about later in your rule of law. That vocab word means that everyone in the country has to follow the law. The law treats everyone the same. It doesn't matter whether you're rich, doesn't matter whether you're poor, doesn't matter whether you're the president, doesn't matter. We have rule of law. We are a country of laws, and everyone must follow those laws. That's the first obligation of being a U.S. citizen. So really all you have to write down is obey the law. That is one of your civic citizen obligations. All right, that was a sloppy line. I'll take a second to erase. And then again on the left, you don't really need to keep writing examples of obligations. Just write it once and then just number them on the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. The next one, you must pay your taxes. No one likes paying taxes, but it is an obligation. If you don't pay your taxes or lie on your taxes, you can go to jail for tax evasion. It is an obligation. No one likes it, but taxes are important. Taxes pay for firefighters and police and roads and schools, and it pays for national defense and the military and the soldiers. We can't run a country without money, so everyone has to pay their taxes. That's why it's an obligation. It's not optional. If it was optional, no one would do it, and then the country would fall apart. So it is an obligation, one of the things you must do. So on the right, you can just write down paying taxes. Okay. All right. Next obligation you must do is you must serve in the armed forces if called upon. Okay, so you don't have to do mandatory service in this country, but if called upon, you do. So you can write down on the right, serving in the armed forces. And there is a vocab word here that you need to know. In this country, in times of war, we can institute what's called a draft, a military draft. You don't have to write that down. I'll tell you what you need to write down in just a second. A military draft is when all men of a certain age can be required to be called into the military, even if they're not in the military. So, for example, in World War II, we needed hundreds of thousands more soldiers. We implemented a draft, and it's literally like a lottery. If they pull your number, you go into the military so that we have men that protect our country. If we're being attacked or we're in war, we have to be able to protect your country. That's why it's an obligation. So we do have a volunteer army. People don't have to go into the army. In some countries they do. Like in South Korea, you have to do 2 years of military service. Everyone. It's an obligation. We have a volunteer army. People sign up to be in the army. But the obligation that you have to require in this actually only applies to men. It doesn't apply to women. We can talk about whether that's fair or should change or not. But the term you need to know, and you might want to write down selective service on the left, and then the definition on the right. Every single male citizen in the United States must sign up for the selective service. Doesn't mean you're signing up for the military. It's a system by which men ages 18 through 25, they register with the U.S. government for military service if called upon. So when I turned 18, I had to go to the post office, I had to give them my name and information, and I registered for the selective service. What that means is if called upon, if we're in a great time of war and they institute a draft, they have my information already and they can just select it and boom, I go right in. If we're attacked, we don't want to have to be like, all right, we have to gather everyone's information in the country who's eligible to be in the armed forces, gather that, and then do a draft. They want to have it on hand in case of emergencies. So again, the selective service is not, I did not sign up for the military. I just gave them my information in case a draft is implemented, then they could, and they call upon me, I have to serve. If I don't serve, I can be arrested for not fulfilling my civic obligations. We have not had a military draft in this country since the early 70s during Vietnam, so we have not had it in the last 50 years. Hopefully we never have to do it again, but every single boy sitting in my class, and possibly girls if it changes. Right now this only applies to men because last time we had a draft there weren't women in the military, but now there are, so it could change. But every single man and boy in this country, when you turn 18, you have to register for the selective service. If you don't do it by the time you're 25, there can be legal consequences. So again, you're not signing up for the military, you're signing up for the selective service in case a draft is implemented. So again, selective service is a system by which men ages 18 through 25 register with U.S. government for military service. Sometimes I put this question on a test. John just turned 18. What obligation does he now have to fulfill? If he just turned 18, it's a selective service. If you have any questions on that, let me know. That one's a little confusing. The other ones, pay taxes, obey the law, are kind of easy, but that's an important one. A couple years ago, this was the EOC question at the end of the year, is asking about what the selective service is, and it is an obligation. It's not optional. Okay, so next one's important. You're going to write this down on the right. Appearing in court. And let's put this on the right as well. So you can put both of those. You could, after you write down appearing in court, you could write down this down here. So sometimes people get confused. We're going to talk all about the court system today. Jury duty does not mean you're on trial. It means you're in the jury. The jury are the 12 or 6 or however many people that sit in the courtroom and decide whether someone is guilty or innocent. So I've served on jury duty twice. I got a notice in the mail. It says you need to show up at the courthouse, and I got picked to be a juror, and I sat on the jury. I listened to the case, and I decided whether someone was guilty or not guilty. That is an obligation. People don't like jury duty. You have to go into court and sit there all day. You have to leave your job. It can be inconvenient, but it is an obligation. If you get jury duty in the mail, you cannot ignore it. You can literally be put in jail or fined for ignoring it. The reason this is an obligation is because in our country, we have rights. And one of our rights is to have a trial by our peers, which means that we are able to be judged by common everyday citizens. And no one's going to go for jury duty if it's not required. So it is an obligation. So if you get a summons in the mail that says, show up to the Flagler courthouse on Friday at 8, it is not optional. You have to go. If you have some other reason for not going, you can delay it, but eventually you're going to have to go and serve on that jury. And that is to protect everyone else so that your right to a trial by jury is guaranteed. So I've served on a jury twice. It wasn't the best experience I've ever had, but I was doing my civic obligation and could have faced legal consequences. Again, on your test, if you're trying to think about what the difference between a responsibility and an obligation is, obligations are things you have to do because they're vital for the country. We need soldiers if we're in war, so the selective service is an obligation. We need money to run the country. Taxes are an obligation. We need law and order. So obeying the law is an obligation. We need to have courts with jurors on it to give fair trial. So it is an obligation. They are not optional. You have to do it or you could legally be in trouble. Now, responsibilities are things you should do that are important to do, that you should do for the common good of the country. And we'll get to those in just a moment. We'll talk a lot more about the courts and juries and everything, but right now you need to know that jury duty is an obligation. So if I put a picture on your test of a jury summons saying, please show up to the court for jury duty, and I ask whether that's a responsibility or obligation, that is an obligation. You could write this one down if you want. A current requirement for you is you are required by law by the state of Florida to attend school. If not, it's called truancy, and your parents can get in trouble if you're truant. So that is an obligation that you currently have to fulfill, along with obeying the law. When you turn 18, if you're a male, sign up for the selective service. But going to school is an obligation that you are currently, if you're listening to this, obeying. So good job. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the other one. So obligations, things you legally have to do. Responsibilities are things you really should do, but are not required by law. So you're going to want to write down on the left the responsibilities of citizens, and you're going to want to write this down as the definition, okay? So these are things that you should do to help the country be a better place, but you're not going to be arrested if you don't do them. So if you don't vote, the police aren't going to knock on your door and arrest you. If you don't volunteer to help your community, the police aren't going to arrest you. They're not obligations. They will knock on your door and arrest you if you break the law or don't pay your taxes. Those are obligations. These are things you should do for a term called the common good. That is, these are things that maybe you don't want to do, but you do them to help America be a better place, okay? So examples of these are voting, attending a public city hall meeting or civic meeting, petitioning the government, running for office, volunteering for a beach cleanup. Do I want to spend, my Saturday morning on the beach, hot, picking up trash? Maybe not, but I do it to make the beach a better place. I do it to make my community a better place. I do it for the common good because I want other people to want and enjoy the beach. So responsibilities are things you should do. We're going to have an election in November. You don't have to vote. It's not a law, but you should do it to participate in the American experiment. So these are things that you should do, but you don't legally have to do, and that's the difference. All right. So let's look at some of these responsibilities. Again, you can just like you did before, you can just write down examples of responsibilities on the left, and then just on the right, you can just number these. So number one, this is probably, and again, like I said, you probably want to write this. Oop, that's a sloppy R. You probably want to write this down on the right. Voting is our most sacred and important civic responsibility. Again, you don't legally have to do it, but we are so lucky to live in a democracy. And if you don't vote, you're not participating in the democracy. If you don't vote, your voice is not heard. Voting changes this country for the better. And so it's really important that when you become old enough, you register and vote. But again, it's a responsibility, it's an honor, but it's not something you have to do. Okay? I don't think you need to write any of this down. Just make sure that you know that voting is a responsibility, not an obligation. But hundreds, if not thousands, of people have been beaten and killed and fought in wars to protect our democracy so that we have the right to vote. So you should take the 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours every election to vote. It's really important. Voting tells our leaders what we like, what we don't like, and creates change. We're going to talk about in a couple of weeks this idea down here. Our government is run on what's called consent of the governed. It means we as citizens give power to government. Government doesn't rule us. Government doesn't give us power. We give power to government. We are the ones that make change in government. And the main way you do that is by voting. So we'll talk a lot more about this term in a few weeks, but voting is probably our most important responsibility. Again, you don't have to do it. No one's going to arrest you if you don't vote, but you really should do it. All right. All right, number 2, being informed. As a citizen, it's your job to be informed on issues. Again, a big election coming up. What does each candidate believe? Which candidate believes the same as me? Make sure that you're getting good information, you're sorting out fake news, and that you're getting your information from reliable sources. As a country, it's vital that we are informed on the issues, that we have good information, that we know what's going on with the country, that we follow the news, that we attend public meetings, that we watch press conferences, that we read the news, so that we can make informed opinions and voting when we vote. So you can just write down, be informed. Again, sometimes when we have an election, there's a bunch of issues I don't really know anything about. So I have to go out and I have to research and I have to try and find good, honest information and make opinions based on that information. All right, number 3, taking part in government. Again, no one's going to arrest you if you don't take part in government, but in order to make our democracy strong, it's important that everyday Americans take part in government. So what are some ways that you can take part in government? You can vote, check. You can protest, check. You could petition. You could write your congressman. But it's not just enough to be informed and vote. You should take an active role in government. Again, you don't have to do it, but our government's stronger when common people are part of it. So taking part in government is another one. Okay, just write that down. All right, what's another responsibility? Helping your community. This is a really important one. Again, there's this term called the common good. You do things not just in your best interest, but you do things to help your community be a better place. So this is one of the most important, besides voting, responsibilities that we do. So maybe you write this down on the left after you write helping down community. You could volunteer, you could help those in need, you could do trash and beach cleanups, you could volunteer at a retirement shelter, you could volunteer at an animal shelter, you could join a committee to help the community be a better place. You want the place you live to be a better place. You want to help the common good. You want to make your community a stronger, better place. So this is, again, a responsibility. No one's going to knock on your door and say, excuse me, you're playing video games. You should be out picking up trash, making your community better. I'm going to arrest you. It's not an obligation, but it's something that if everyone does it, we can make the country a better place. We can help the common good. Okay. Help your community. Volunteer. Respecting others and their rights. You might not agree with everyone. Most likely you won't agree with a lot of people, but it is important that you respect them, that you respect their right to believe what they want. You should know your rights and you should be respectful of other people's beliefs. So that's an important one too. You don't necessarily need to, that's important. You don't have to write down because you don't have to write down all of them. But okay, this one I do want you to write down. I want you to go ahead and write down this on the left here, common good, and you're going to write this down on the right hand side there as your definition. The common good is that you do your obligations and responsibility to help make your community a better place. It's beliefs or action that are seen to benefit the community rather than your individual interest. So if I donate money to a charity, that doesn't help me individually. It takes money away from me, but I do it to help the environment or to help my community be a better place. Again, if I volunteer for 4 hours to pick up trash, that may not be my favorite activity, but I want my community to be a better place. So this common good is the idea that you're doing it to make your community, to make your country better. So if you follow the law and you obey the law and you pay your taxes and you volunteer in your community and you're informed and you participate in government, if everyone does that, we're going to have a stronger, better democracy and better country. So this idea of, sometimes it's called a public good, sometimes it's referred to as common good, but that you're doing it not for yourself, but for your neighbor, but for others, but for the country, right? So people who join the military, they're putting their lives at risk. It's maybe not in their individual interest, but they're doing it to protect the common good of the country, to make it a stronger place. So down here it says, by fulfilling your obligations or responsibility, you are protecting the common good of the country. Okay, so that term is an important one. You'll have a test question that says something like that. It will say, why should citizens do their responsibilities? And it'll say, to help the community or common good. Okay, that's it. Again, to recap real quick, give you a 60-second recap. Obligations are things you legally have to do as a citizen. Serve on juries, pay your taxes, obey the law. If you're a male, sign up for selective service at 18. Responsibilities are things you really should do to make the common good in your community a better place, like vote, be informed, participate in government, volunteer in your community. You need to know the two definitions of both those things. You need to know examples for each. All right, that's it. If you're in class, go ahead. If you're in class, go ahead and write your summary at the bottom, 20, 30 words, raise your hand, and I'll come over and read it. If you have any questions, let me know. If you're at home, write your summary on page 5. On page, I forget now, page 7? On page 9, write your summary at the bottom of page 9. I've also attached the Cornell notes with all the notes that I think are important. Print those, cut them out, glue them onto page 10. You can highlight the important information. If you have any questions, let me know, and we're done.